In this video, we're going to continue doing some more examples with performing operations with imaginary numbers. In this problem, we have 5i minus the quantity of -4 minus i. So the first thing, make sure you remember how you deal with subtracting a quantity. So let's rewrite this. So when I subtract a quantity, and there's a couple ways to think of it. One way to think of it is just to kind of distribute this negative. So if I'm doing 5i minus -4, so let's write that. I'm doing 5i minus -4, and I'm doing 5i minus -i. So I'm also subtracting -i. And when you subtract a negative, you can think of that as adding. So subtracting -4 is the same thing as adding 4. Subtracting -i is the same thing as adding I. If you find that confusing, another thing that you could do is you can think of distributing a -1 here. So if I distribute -1, I include this negative sign with that. So -1 times -4 is +4. There's that +4 part. And -1 times -i is +i. So there's that +i piece. And then I can put together this 5i and this 1i. 5i plus I would be 6i. Make sure you don't turn this into like an I squared kind of deal. You're not multiplying these i's. It's not I times I, so you don't want any I squareds here. And then we have this +4. And let's flip this around so that we have that in the standard form of a complex number. Final answer for that one would be 4 plus 6i. Let's take a look at a few more. In this one, we have 2i times I. Now, in the last problem, I mentioned that, we're not multiplying i's, so we don't want I squareds. This time we are. I times I would be I squared. And, this 2 times this stuff would be 2i squared. And in an earlier video, I explained to you that anytime you see an I squared, remember that that is the same thing as the number -1. So we have 2 times -1. Just make that substitution. And 2 times -1 would be -2. See what else we have here. So in this one, we have 3i times the quantity, -6 plus 5i. So this is our classic distributive property. 3i times -6, that's going to give us -18i. And we have 3i times +5i. That's going to give us positive, so we're going to put plus 15i squared. From there, remember that substitution, I squared is always the same thing as -1. So we have -18i plus 15 times -1. 15 times -1 would just be -15. So we have -18i plus -15. And let's write this in standard form. And instead of saying plus -15 here, I could have just said -15. But final answer will be -15. And then don't lose this negative right here. -15 minus 18i. Let's do one more for this video. In this problem, we got -3i times 8i. All right, so first thing, let's take care of our numbers here. So whenever you're so you can think of this as -3 times I times 8 times I. So really you have 4 different factors here being multiplied together. Remember that multiplication is commutative, so the order doesn't matter. So really, I can flip these two around. It's not going to make any difference. I can make this as -3 times 8 times I. Or really, I can just take this multiply. -3 times 8, that's -24. I times I is I squared. I have -24i squared. Don't forget the substitution. You don't want to leave any I squareds in your final answer. I squared is -1. That's something we're much more familiar with, so we want to always make that substitution whenever possible. And a negative times a negative is a positive, so -24 times -1 would be +24.